Okay, good morning. Good morning and welcome everybody. Welcome Nathan. Thank you so much for doing this. Welcome everybody. I know it's weekday and it's on the morning session, so I really appreciate all of you taking time to be here. Thank you so much for being here. So let me start with a formal introduction of Nathan. Most of you probably know him very well, and he's a legend in the HR field. But I would still like to introduce him formally for those who might not, be familiar with Nathan and his work. So Nathan is a partner with Deloitte, and he focuses on advisory and enterprise development work. He's a former CHRO of Deloitte of South Asia, where he was a member of the India leadership team and served on the talent executive leadership of Deloitte Asia Pacific and Global Talent Leadership Forum. Nathan has over 40 years of experience in HR management in India and MNCs across diverse industries, including manufacturing, services, telecom, IT, and professional services. He has worked extensively in the field of education and skills development as the pillars for social upliftment. A respected voice of the HR profession in India, Nathan was featured in all national events of significance related to HR. He has been recognized as a distinguished alumnus of XLRI by his alma mater. He was recognized and awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2021 by Economic Times and Business People. He served as the immediate past president of National Human Resources Development Network, NHRD. He has also served on the board of Sumedas, an Academy of Human Context, as its chairman. Nathan is on the advisory board of the Economic Times on HR matters. Nathan is an author of a bestseller, The Heart of Work, and I'm hoping to hear, some of the stories from the book as well. He's a regular blogger, a HR power influencer on LinkedIn and Twitter, and has an active presence on social media as well, and known for his office truths. He's recognized the power profile of LinkedIn and Twitter. So that's the formal introduction. Now, Nathan has been a mentor, guide, supporter, kind of like a father figure to many of us. Okay, I think somebody needs to mute. For many of us in HR, and he's been around and extremely supportive, and I'm very grateful for him, taking time to be here. So welcome, Nathan.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sriram. It's a pleasure and honor being with all of you. I know how it is to do one of these seminars at 11:30 in the morning, but there's nothing called a perfect time. Now is the best time.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of people have come back and told me that they've registered, but they can't make it. So I'm going to send them the recording as well. So we'll make sure that, it reaches a significant number of people, post this session as well. So let's, kind of start off, Nathan. And as I was inviting you for this session, I was thinking what, would be the ideal topic to get the best, out of you. And I think the one that I decided on was, driving excellence through human centricity. And we are hearing this word human centricity more often, especially post-COVID. There's a lot of talk about human centricity, but I think it has to be a combination of, driving excellence as well. And that's why I've really brought both of them together, because, we want the workplaces exist for a purpose, and, we must do it with the aspect of human centricity. So let me start with my first question to you. And the first question is, do you think the future of work is headed towards more human-centric workplaces?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's a great question. There is no doubt that we are heading towards a more human-centric place. The times of theory X and theory Y and how people clocked in and clocked out is giving way to a focus on things like well-being, work-life integration, some kind of a special focus on mental well-being, fostering equity and fair play. All these go in the direction of a place which is more human-centric. The fact that we seek feedback from people itself points to human centricity. Technologies are also helping. So short answer is yes, we are moving towards a more human-centric workplace.
Just put it in the chat. We'll also open up for a discussion, as we go along in the later part of this session. So let me just continue this chat with you, Nathan. So one thing that I had is in our need to be, more effective and scalable as organizations. Unintentionally has the focus, kind of somehow gone on to more into processes and policies than perhaps, on people.
I think both are important. Processes are important, people are important. Sometimes this whole thing of moving towards a very, let's say, focused on processes is what happens in organizations, wholly unintentional. Because when you start to look at process looks at predictability looks at reliability moves towards trust. And in engaging with organizations and their products and services, we are really looking at trust. So the start point of all of that happens to be just a process. Sometimes we fall in love with our processes, happens. What we need to do perhaps is to review these processes, take a hard look whether this is the right thing for us to do, seek feedback, and that's a great way to get there. But not having any process itself will not get you to where you wish to be. So that's the short answer.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because one of the things that, as I'm doing my work as a solopreneur also, I'm looking at something called as a human centricity audit, which will look at processes from the element of human emotions and feelings. Whether because all of these are intended for certain purposes, and one of those purposes is for people to feel good about what we are doing, right? And hence, if we are able to actually review them with the lens of human centricity, small things like waiting time when somebody comes for an interview, what's the tone of the interviewer, if we just do checks slowly, it brings up awareness saying that, oh, unconsciously are we doing some things which are unintended. And all right, so let me move to another interesting question that I have in terms of especially on culture and being influenced a lot by MNCs and the West. And the West largely has a very rule-based, kind of culture. And it works for them because all of them, kind of adhere to that. But when we come to India or in the more, Eastern countries, we are more of a relationship culture. And now, given that, many of us have a MNC lineage, and the rule-based culture automatically kind of comes from there, but the audience is more of a relationship culture. How do we reconcile or balance this with the objective of driving excellence?
Um, Again, I mean, there's nothing called either or. Rule base gets us into a more predictable process, something that I spoke about earlier. Relationship base gets us into a more comforting state because I know the person that I'm dealing with. A relationship would help me seek out in case I need help. Or if there is something which goes beyond, if I've really faltered, if I have messed up, that relationship comes in to support me. If it is rule based, it would hit me between the eyes. India has always suffered with this because we have always been more relationship oriented. But one of the good things that have happened over a period of time is that with the advent of a lot of multinationals here in India, I think the marriage between processes, rule based, and relationship is finding a good congruence. This confluence is important because there are countries in the East which have married this really well. Japan is one such example. So they are fiercely loyal, they are all about relationships, but the start point is always a process.
Right.
The Japanese processes are just fantastic.
Right.
And at the same time, you have relationships. And there is a way in which they manage to keep a certain divide between what is rule based and where does relationship starts. India, at least a lot of people in India, they suffer from this boundary management, and I think that should be the focus if we wish to drive excellence.
Fantastic. Dinesh, I saw your question. I will, kind of take it up in a bit. Okay. I will come to that in a bit. So Uh, do you think there are ways in which organizations can actively strategize around tapping into emotions and feelings more effectively? A lot of companies have this fun at work, employee engagement, but most of it is around parties and events, which is good, which is a de-stressor in some ways. But I'm asking more in terms of, how do we move into the treatment, of people, that zone, and is there more that we can do to tap into emotions and feelings strategically?
I think it starts with open communication, starts with empathy, starts with understanding that there are areas the companies want to look at and focus on. Technologies have been used. There are things like sentient analysis, dipstick surveys, and the like. A thoughtful way of doing and bringing all this together wins the day. This whole notion of fun at work has been reduced to events that are transient, and I don't think that will last very long. It's good to have one of those fun Fridays, but that does not really move mountains. But if you're looking at how you can tap into the emotions of people, I mean, many organizations are really looking at just these very quick dipsticks. And that sentient analysis really helps in understanding where people are, what is the state of feeling. I know, for example, there's an organization, as soon as you flip on the computer, there is a
Mhm.
pop-up.
Mhm.
There are smileys, a VP, and a neutral.
Mhm.
And you can press one of those, and in a moment, at that point in time, at the slice in time, you get to know what the sentient is in that organization. So I think we need to start to look at elements of that, because over some period of time, if you want to really become a human centric organization, because that will really drive efficiencies, this is one good place to start. Focusing on um, parties, events, those are all very transient. They are not going to last a long. But what those do is they help to integrate newcomers into the mix. So it's a good way to do that. Over some period of time, it just lacks, and sometimes people even stop going to these kinds of events because they don't find it as meaningful.
Yeah. Because I think entertainment and engagement are slightly different things, right? This is in the realm of entertainment, and that is required, from time to time. But engagement is a, kind of slightly different ball game. And I think the key people in that factor is always your leaders and your managers. And so, from that perspective, if you were to prescribe, or give some guidelines for what people should do daily, because I think from all my research over time and, my book and all of that, I found that we have to do things that fit into our day. That is the only way that consistent change can happen. And anything else is, at a thought level, doesn't get translated into action. So one of my big themes is that anything you want to change, do it in the context of the day. And that's what really kind of helps. So in the context of a day, if you were to, kind of give some recommendations to leaders or managers, what are some things that people should be doing?
I think a genuine interest in people is what is needed to be a human centric leader. Um, they must lead and see the goodness in people. I think the moment you start to look at goodness in people, that itself goes a very long way, because you set in parts a certain culture. Let me tell you a story. I was a management trainee, my very first job, straight out of campus, heading into a British multinational. This was a factory in the heart of Bihar, now Jharkhand. And this was an explosives plant. And I still remember, as I went into work, I never bothered about even cleaning my shoes. And my boss was an army officer retired, and he was a very supportive gentleman. One day it rained. When it rained, my shoes got cleaned. When I say got cleaned, I didn't do anything about it. My shoes just got clean. When I went into work, my boss looked at me and he looked at my shoes and he says, Nathan, your shoes are shining. Now, how do I tell him that, well, I had nothing to do with it and it was just the rains? Very sheepishly, I left the room. And much later, when I was getting off to the following day, setting out from my office, what do you think was the first thing I did before I left for work? Yes, I shined my shoes. I still shine my shoes, Sriram. I still shine my shoes. All that happened on one rainy day was my boss catching me do something right, of course, unintentional though. But I'll always remember him because he was a person who really went out of his way to catch people doing something right. It was very easy for him to say, your shoes are dirty. He never said that even once.
Mm.
If you really want to set a culture, then culture is looking at what what is happening around and see if you can really set the ball by your personal example. You don't really have to go too far. If you have to be human centric, genuine interest
Mm.
genuine interest in people is where it starts. Let me give you another story. See, all of us at work, there are times when we are very good, we could walk through concrete walls, win the world single-handedly. There are also times when we feel completely weak, emaciated. We could be in the pink of hell and at the same time feel completely emaciated, completely down and out. And there was one such person who had walked into my office to say that she was going to leave the organization because she didn't feel that she was performing very well. And she had had a discussion with the boss, and the boss said, well, if that's what you want to do, you may leave the organization. And she happened to be slightly troubled, and I offered her a seat. And then I said, would you want to talk about it? And then she talked about some of the struggles that she has had, ailing father who had terminal cancer, etc., and how she lost him. And the whole year has not been a great year for her. And then I just came out of the room. I called this manager, boss of hers, and I said, hey, would you want to take a relook at this person? And he was a very nice person. He
Mm.
said, Nathan, she should not really be leaving the organization. But if you can ask her to persuade her to meet me again, things could possibly work. I asked her to go meet her manager. The manager said, you don't really have to leave. But let's find out. And he made a statement. His statement was pretty much like, failure is an event, not the person. So we have every trust and faith in you, Archana. And yes, that's her name. And then one thing led to another. Fast forward a year from now, there was again everybody sitting around a table trying to find out who was the best of the lot. And he had to go through a number of people in the organization. Everybody to a person said that the best performer by yards was Archana. She was rated as the best performer in the following year. So the whole thing is about, can you create a supportive environment, a development environment, an environment where people would be willing to come and speak? And you have managers like this person who was a boss, very supportive, and said, well, there is, and we will find a way. Not doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, it really sets uh, a groundwork for open communication, empathy, understanding, the areas that companies should really be focusing on. Well, that's the story.
Wonderful. Thank you. And it reminds me actually about the humanity that that we often ignore. I recently went to Shabrimala on the long route. It's a long trek, and it was extremely hot this time, and I was struggling a bit. But the number of people who were willing to help, somebody offered me glucose, somebody said drink water, somebody said hold my shoulder, somebody was patiently waiting behind me. We kind of take it for granted that people are always pushing and, kind of thing. But then, there is a lot of humanity that is actually around us. It's just that, if you're open enough to notice and, kind of just, experience it, it's such a, kind of thing. And that really woke me up, because in that moment of struggle, when you realize that, okay, people are so nice to us, and that is, most people are like that.
Sure.
Most people are like that. So I think that's, that kind of resonated a lot with me. On the question of failure, are organizations really supportive of failure?
Oh, this is a difficult question, Sriram. I think organizations look at failure largely through the lens of an incident. And subsequently, what happens is branding, or branding in a, when I talk about branding, I'm talking about in a not so positive way.
Hmm.
Um, but there are organizations which encourage failure.
Hmm.
They would say, go for it. If you win, then that's fine. If you lose, well, this is just one more year. I can say this in my several years of being in the industry, there have been good years, there have been terrible years, there have been downright so poor years. And I'm very, very fortunate because I've had bosses who would be very supportive and say, hey, this was a bad year for everybody. You're no different. Or this year was a difficult one for you because of the challenges that you've had. And the years that are very good for you, and I think we must also remember that nothing lasts forever.
Right.
Organizations today, in difficult times, how they deal with people who are less than um, average performers, that really shines through whether they are empathetic. I know of organizations where they give people a second chance. Maybe they even give a third chance.
Hmm.
These chances are important
Hmm.
because, in a way, you're not playing God. You're not in a position to say, sorry, this is not working out. Out you go.
Hmm.
You have, with a lot of difficulty, managed to hire somebody. Now it is incumbent on you to make the person successful. So if the person has failed, look at yourself in the mirror because, in part,
Hmm.
you could also be responsible.
Yeah.
The environment could be responsible. Organizations which look at failure in through these lens, I think they go a very long way because then that's truly about engagement and not about transactions. In a transaction, you could fail or you could pass. If it is fail, it is throw that the whole thing out. If it is pass, you just move on. This is what happens in an assembly line. We are not an assembly line.
Yeah.
People are not.
Correct. And failure is so important to innovation. No? All through history, the story of Edison and how many times they failed and things like that. And that is what finally led to a discovery that changed the world, right? And yet, there is this whole, because I feel that, everybody likes to talk about it, but in reality, the person on the ground doesn't feel supported enough, about, kind of failure. And, that's, I think, certainly a, place where people can invest in terms of really articulating that they're supportive of it. They may be or may not be, but most people don't think you're supportive. And hence, kind of tend to play safe. And in your playing safe, innovation obviously takes a backseat. I'm going to take a
Also,
quick, yeah.
apart from just
Go ahead.
innovation, I'll touch upon another point. People have inherent strengths. If
Correct.
you look at those inherent strengths that people have and play to their strengths,
Yeah.
they feel even more successful, they feel supported. But if you take somebody and then you say, okay, I think you've been doing well in this particular area, I think you should move into compensation and benefits. When the person is not very good at analytics,
Right.
he's not very good with an Excel sheet. And then you force the person to take on a role in which they would have very little strengths.
Yeah.
And at the end of the year, brand them as, well, this has not been a very good year for you. So thank you very much. Nice knowing you. I think it's our failure. Look at what people can do. I know of several instances where ostensibly somebody has failed in something.
Hmm.
They may not even know their strengths. And
Yeah.
then you move them out and you say, I think you have good communication skills. I think you have a way with making sure that things get done. Maybe this is one area you could work on and move the person. Now, smaller organizations do not have that latitude. Larger organization, mid-sized organization certainly have that. They can leverage that. But even in smaller organizations, even if people play to people's strengths, even if they fail in some area, they will start to grow. Growth is not only about winning, growth is also about losing, about failing, learning from our failures, and moving on. Because as much as the person learns, a smart boss will also learn. They'll know that, well, this is not the strength area. Let me move the person to one more place where they could be very useful in, and they will feel successful.
Yeah, and I think it's a very important thing, which is, a little bit ignored in the corporate thing. If you look at sport, right? Virat Kohli is playing to his strengths. Sachin Tendulkar is playing to his strengths. Your basketball players, everybody is actually, it's not their weakness. They may have one or two, but their strengths is what makes them great. And yet, if you look at, even our performance way, strengths, most times what we also do is we just copy paste from the previous thing because, it is, nobody talks about it. It's like a thing. But then if it's weakness, that people will ask you and you'll be prepared. And there's so much of, attention that goes into that we often ignore the fact that the greatest, potential of that person is in their strengths, and how we can learn to teach them to, kind of be better at it is probably the missing. Like, and I feel, in performance reviews, I have a huge issue because, 90 plus percentage of people who walk into a performance and come out don't come inspired. Okay, even the 10% are just about satisfied. They're not complaining. Okay, but they are, perhaps not inspired. So there is something missing. I think, the whole idea of thing is to grow people, to motivate them. And, all these conversations somewhere have gotten into a very defensive and, kind of even the goal setting and all that is, it doesn't leave people inspired. Where do you think, what is missing in this whole performance conversations, especially?
So I'll tell you two things. One, we're talking about assessment at one end. The second one is about conversations. So I remember many, many years ago, I wanted to be an athlete. Why did I want to be an athlete? Because my father was into athletics and he was very good, etc., etc. And I told my mother I was going to the corporation ground, and in the corporation ground there was a self-appointed coach, and I told him that I wanted to be a sprinter. So he said, "Okay, my timer is here. On your mark, get set, go." And then I darted like a rabbit, and I finished my 100 meters. And when I came back, he looked at my timing. It said 17 seconds. He looked at me and he said, "No ways. You can never be an athlete. Young boy, be gone. It's over." I was crushed. I came home, I was weeping. My mother saw me and said, What's wrong with you? You're a grown-up child. What's wrong? So he says, "Amma, this is what really happened." And so he said, "Wrong question. Wrong question. Go back again to this coach of yours on the ground and ask him this question, Coach, what am I really good at?" So I went back the next day and I went up to him, and as is the norm, you touch his feet and you say, "Listen, coach, I know I came in yesterday and I was not very good at, but what could I be really good at?" So he says, "Okay, here's a 400-meter track. Why didn't you start running?" So I started to run round 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then he stopped me and then he called me over and he said, "You will be a very good middle and long distance runner. Choose." Much later, Sriram, I was my college athletic captain.
Wow.
Yeah, I never lost my 5,000 and 10,000 meters ever in all the time that I stayed in that college. Not because of uh, a failure, it is because of asking the right question.
Right.
That leads me on to the second thing. One of my very first sit down conversation that I had about my performance was with a gentleman called Ravindran. Ravi was my boss, and this was in a British multinational, my first one. At the end of 1 year, I was really asking myself, scratching my head, what do I tell him what I've done in all my 1 year? 12 months. I rack my brains, I try to put them down because every one of what I have done seemed very insignificant. What am I supposed to tell him? That conversation, I was full of fear, trepidation, ran really deep, started the conversation. And what was supposed to be a 20-minute conversation ran for 2 hours. And it didn't seem like a performance conversation at all. It was one of those very regular conversations. He asked about me. He asked about what I was interested in, what were my strength areas. And to date, I can tell you the Sriram, it is one of the best conversations I've had in my entire life.
Wow.
Every time I meet him, because I think performance conversations usually get into This is what you have done against these particular goals. You are deficient in these areas, or you've done well in these areas. And by the way, hand on heart, I know how I have performed. So perhaps the whole question is around, do I have to wait till the end of the year and then quake in my shoes before going into that room? Or can I have performance coaching that can come on a more periodic basis, perhaps even once a month? So in Deloitte, for example, we have done away with all these annual appraisals. We
Right.
do check-ins, and
Mm.
check-ins are a great way of getting people to understand what they wish to do, what my aspirations are, and we have done away with the bell curve. But back to the point, it starts with a good conversation,
Right.
and the conversation is about my aspirations, what help I need, and how I can grow, because these are the questions which are on top of my mind. The boss clearly knows how you have performed. Of course, you will be given performance feedback, but that happens on a periodic basis. And there can always be course corrections. And
Yeah.
it can happen right through the year instead of at the end of the year, yes, you have done this, you have not done that. Of course, it can be full of fear. I think we need to move away from a judgment call to a
Mm.
more energizing, enlivening conversation that helps people.
Yeah. Fantastic. The fact that you remember that conversation after all these years itself is an indication how powerful it was.
Yes,
Right.
indeed.
And I feel that few things. One is the preparation. People should prepare for a positive conversation and focus on the strengths and then have a more of a coaching conversation. One of the yardsticks that I tell people is that if you, as the manager, is talking for most of the conversation, there is a problem. You should be talking much lesser, maybe 20%. And if the person you are kind of giving feedback is talking more, that is an indication that your conversation is perhaps going well as a thing. So at this point, I'll take a question from Dinesh, Nathan. So he says, is human centricity the responsibility of HR only? As most of business leaders driven by quarterly results, stock prices, etc., you know, especially series of layoff decisions by large enterprises in spite of large cash reserves, makes us believe human approach has limited room. Can you share your thoughts?
To believe that all of culture, all of human centricity lies on the shoulders of people and human resources is a misnomer. It starts only with a business leader. It starts and it does not end, curiously, it does not end with the business leader. That is where is the start point. And yes, we will be quarter on quarter, be measured for what we have done, what our performance is like. I think this is the single biggest important thing that we have within ourselves. But just to miss out on the human centricity is missing the wood for the trees. The only thing organizations have which can leverage either technology, process, product, service, anything along that continuum, bottom line, people. So if there is a human-centric organization, it really goes a very long way. And it's not an either-or situation. Yes, there are times. I mean, I know of an organization which went through some very difficult times. When I say very difficult times, they're almost at a point of capitulating. At that time, the CEO went up in front of the people and said, we had taken deep cuts. And at this point in time, I have no other go but to have a 20% layoff. And people understood that. People knew that this could be a do or die. A year later, the company started to come back. And you know what, Sriram? Right through those 12 months, they kept in touch with the people who got laid off to check whether they got jobs outside. End
Mm.
of 12 months, there was an appointment letter for each one of them. And they
Wow.
brought everybody back. And would you believe it? Everyone came back. Not a single person turned down the offer. So it's to do with, yes, there could be experiences of what's happening on the financial front of an organization, but it cannot be at the cost of human centricity. The culture will be long talked after a person goes to bed.
Right.
So I think it's an important thing. I do, by the way, it's a great question, and it should get people to start to think about it.
Nice. So when I talk of happiness and human centricity to some organizations, there is this genuine apprehension that, perhaps becoming too nice can make them look weak and they could be taken for a ride. And it is not it's actually, most people have this inner thing saying that, oh, okay, will I, kind of be taken for a ride? Will I be taken advantage of and things like that? So, what's your point of view on that?
You see, the whole thing starts with understanding the baseline. For example, Sriram, if you say that I'm going to set expectations, this quarter we need a 20% growth, you're setting an expectation. We put up a very supportive environment. Yes, I think that's important. Yes, we will reward people because this is how they get things done. I will also look at what is it that took to get those results. Is this a person who has run roughshod? So once you put the expectations on the table, they know that the organization is doing everything to be of support to an individual or sets of individuals, the entire organization, people get it. They
Hmm.
won't think of you as being weak. You can still be very kind hearted and be very firm about what you expect of somebody. I don't think, I mean, the very idea of being kind and results focused is not an either or. There is an ampersand, there is
Hmm.
an and. And that's the beauty of a human centric organization.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the need for, patience in certain interactions, I think it's more because people get very insecure. The moment they see certain things slipping out of control, your insecurity pops up, and then you come back, to micromanaging. And obviously, people kind of don't like that attitude. But I think, though, as you become more experienced, you kind of tend to know that it's a longer game, that this is not one time. You have, the person matters more than that particular, kind of thing. And to be kind in the moment of stress is very difficult. But it's very difficult. It's not, necessarily easy. And I've struggled with it, many times. And over time, of course, I've gotten better at it. But it's, certainly not an easy thing. So I want to hear some of your stories from your book. Anything that you feel is relevant for us, let's, kind of listen to some of your stories, and then we'll move
Well,
forward.
I did intersperse some stories there, but I'll tell you a story of what I think is if you're looking at an organization, um, I can talk about how you build culture in organizations without all these big banners and big statements like "we shall overcome" and all that. No, I remember years ago, straight out of a business school, my first job was to look after the cafeteria. The second job was to look after transport. And cafeteria, I went up to my boss and said, seriously, I mean, you do know that I come from this business school. I mean, do you want me to do this job? So he looked at me and says, there is no job which does not add value. Just listen to me, go do this job. The cafeteria job was a messy one, but I learned what it is to really sit down with workers, sit down with the cooks, the chefs, the cleaners, and really understand their work. Over some period of time, I became good friends with them. And I also know that in the transport department, we had all of 5 cars. And this was in a place called Gomia, manufacturing explosives. The nearest city was Ranchi, which was 70 kilometers away. The other one was Bokaro Steel. So you need the explosives grade um, materials for the coal mines. So we had to be near the coal areas. So that's where this was situated. I remember one day somebody came up to me and said, I need a car to go to this place called Giride, which is about some 3 hours away. And I said, I don't have a car, which was a point, Sriram. I didn't have a car. This place had to fire engines, to ambulances, 5 cars, all of them, just my bad luck, were in the garage. And this guy said, I have to leave, and if you don't, I'm going to complain. Well, he didn't even wait for me. He went and complained to the general manager. I was summoned, and my general manager started to berate me. And he was so upset and angry. You can't keep a single car, this, that. And I was shaking, quivering. And I recognized that if you're coming straight out of a college and this is your first job, the first fear is, am I going to be sacked? And that's all that was playing on my head. And suddenly, out of the blue, the door opened, and my boss came and stood between me and the general manager. He stood in front. He looked at the general manager and says that the boy may be responsible, but I am accountable. I am accountable. So if you have to say anything to me, to him, say it to me. Then he looks at me and says, Nathan, you may go back to your office. I ran. I just ran. 5 minutes later, he comes back and he says the problem has been solved. Then I asked my boss, what did you do? So he says, well, I looked at the general manager and said, well, there are no cars. That's the reality, but he can use my personal car. I have no problems. Let him use my personal car. And he gave the keys to the person and said, I'll get you a driver, and this car can take you across. But the general manager at that point in time felt very, very sheepish because he could have given his personal car too. If this is so very important, he did not. But that day, I understood the fundamentals of leadership. Today, even today, Sriram, if you ask me what's the single biggest lesson in leadership, the lesson is stand up for your people. He never let me down, never. And through my entire life, if there is one thing that stood up was never throw somebody, part of your team, under the bus. Just does not happen. Very, very powerful lesson of what it is to stand up for somebody. And if you'll humor me, I'll give you another story which was pretty recent. Almost about a year ago, I was in my chairman's office, and I was speaking to him. And at that point in time, there was a young lad who came in, and he was almost like, less than 2 months old, and he had just joined the firm. And he wanted to meet the chairman and just say hello, nothing else. This is more out of respect. So he walked into the room. The chairman shook him by his hands. And at that time, there was a third person who came into the room, and that was the driver. And the driver looked at, there were 2 huge, almost like big suitcases full of files. And he came in to collect those so that he could take it to the car and spare the chairman of having to walk around with 2 big boxes. And as he was going to exit, he took a bottle of Bisleri water, which was on the table. It was not an empty one, it was a full one, and he took it. And the chairman looked at him and he said, gentlemen, will you put that back? And the driver looked at him incredulously and says, seriously, sir? This is something which is for you? I know you're going to another client meeting, and this is for you in the car. So he says, that's a continuation of work. And the chairman looked at him and says, well, that may be right for you. This is the rightful property of the firm to be enjoyed within its precincts. So please leave this here, and I can buy enough water. So as you go down, make sure you get a couple of bottles, keep them for me. I'll be there in 5 minutes. That moment was not lost on me. It was not lost on the young professional leader. You don't drive integrity in people through posturing, through saying, these are my values, and this is how I expect you to live your values. You get people to understand because people see you behave one way, and that is far more important. So I do believe that these are the stories that are waiting to be told. Each one of us, you, me, people who are on the call, even as I'm speaking, will go through several stories in their head of the ones that have affected them very deeply. And that's really a compilation of about 70 odd stories that I put together. And this is called The Harder Work. And of course, any question that you ask, I can always come up with a story. And but thank you for humoring me. Thank you for asking me for a couple of the stories. Thank you.
Beautiful. And I think, both of them had very, kind of interesting takeaways. I think from the second story, I think the key is for all of us is that people are always watching, listening. So, what you do, how you do is important. And, kind of that is who you truly are. And, we must, kind of make an effort to make sure that who we are is actually, genuine and authentic. Because often what we think is that, people don't notice, because, I've seen that, especially if you're the boss, people are so glued to you that they can even, kind of from your twitch of your eye, from your eye movement, they know if you're supportive or not. And then they know, whether they should propose this or not. Right. And people are so tuned into things. There are people who've come into my office, just taken a look at me and said, "Oh, you're in a bad mood. I'll come later." Okay. So it's like, so I think we have to be, kind of authentic with who we are. And on the other question of, standing up for people, I think most people have the intention to do it. Problem is when this whole question of right and wrong comes, when, somewhere people believe that, oh, somebody from my team has done something wrong. And I think that's the place where I see that this whole idea of, standing up becomes difficult even for them, because they are conflicted themselves. And somewhere this idea of standing up seems to be more of an old world, kind of a practice. And we know, with wisdom, that we know that, it will pay dividends. But how do we, kind of teach this, or how do we propagate this more actively to especially the younger managers?
No different from the second story. You have to be that example. A leader will have to. So if the leader finds something good with somebody and then states it publicly, it's a very clear way in which you are really encouraging somebody publicly. But if you have a view where you know that what the person's saying is wrong, instead of admonishing the person in public, encouraging another, perhaps even contrarian point of view, and asking the person to consider that if they are in a public meeting, that's one way to do that. But standing up for the people always is not about old school or new school. It's about the right school. It's the only way that you can. I mean, there are times when we will not be able to get certain things done. There is a limitation. At that point in time, if you really say, sorry, it's not me, but the person who's working under me. I mean, if you take collective responsibility, if everybody puts their heads together and say, well, this person is in a bit of a spot, let's find some ways of helping that person. I think that goes a very long way. There's nothing called right, there's nothing called wrong, but there is a way in which you could really help people by just the small acts that you do for them. People understand that very well. Right. And more often than not, it's not about a judgment call that you make. Sometimes you may even go and you can fall on the sword and say, hey, listen, I think we screwed up and I take responsibility for it. And once you say that, they're not going to come after you and say, tell me the last man standing who made that mistake.
Correct.
And I'll have his head or her head. No. And he or she is a good leader who says, I am responsible. The moment they do that, then people who are watching them will say, hey, listen, it's just not me. It's also my boss. And I think it's important for me to make my boss feel good, because if he or she does, then I feel good innately.
Yeah. Superb. My last question before I open it up to the audience is, interpersonal conflict is a huge drain in, especially in corporates. You see the politics and things like that. Given your, long experience, what is your guidance on that?
So I have found it useful. The best way for interpersonal conflict is not to confront, but to engage. The moment you disengage, it's not like everything is over.
Right.
It's at a subliminal level, it'll erupt at some point in time. So I think it's important to really engage. I'll give you an example. I remember in one of my early stints, I was going to be meeting a trade union leader who I did not like. Why did I not like him? Don't ask me why, Sriram. I just didn't like his looks. He seemed arrogant. He seemed to be dressed in a way which is very alien from the way I dress. I mean, I can find 10 reasons why I don't like the guy. And besides, everybody told me that he was a terror, he was this, he was that. And already my head was full of things buzzing to say, I don't want this man. I don't like him. And besides, he had made certain statements against me that I found very offensive. So I'm meeting this guy, and I had some serious issues with this gentleman. So anyway, I'm not a leftist or a rightist. I decided to just go and engage. Suddenly, as I was walking to meet him, something snapped in me. I said, "Hey, just calm down. Uh, just engage." So I started to listen to this person. And engagement, I realized much later, starts with listening. All this is hindsight 2020, but I'll tell you what happened that day. I started listening to him. I started listening to his point of view. And the more I listened to him, there was a seeming shift in the way I was thinking about this person and the ground that I held and the beliefs which are the core of my behavior with this gentleman. This engagement with my union leader rattled him more than it rattled me, because he suddenly found somebody who was listening to him. And by the way, it was not like I went there premeditated, I'm going to listen to him. And I nodded and I asked those very searching, meaningful questions. All this he said to me much later. We became good friends. And I can tell you this, Sriram, it's almost like about 30 years since I had left that factory. The union leader, even now, and he must be, mid 80s or something, he would still send me a WhatsApp message and he will exhort me to come and meet him in some place. I never lost touch with this gentleman. He taught me so much. So interpersonal conflicts starts with engaging, and engaging where there is an open mind and a willing heart.
Right.
Everything will start to unfold. So that's my story.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to open it up for the audience to ask some questions. Anybody from the audience, you can put it in the chat or you can just unmute and ask your question. We have about 5 minutes. Any questions from the audience?
Hi, Sriram. This is Chand here.
Hi, Chand. Hi, please go ahead.
Sriram, thank you so much for bringing our, we hold Nathan very close to our hearts at XLRA. So thank you for bringing one of our legends here. Nathan, sir, so good to see you and hear you.
Very nice to see you, Chand. Thank you so much.
Would love to hear your thoughts on building culture.
I think all of culture starts with every person in an organization. Culture is really an aggregation of beliefs in action. So first is putting a set of beliefs, and a group gets together and they say this is what we believe in. And then the people who are in an organization start to see this in action. For example, I spoke about integrity. And in fact, I wrote about this as integrity in a bottled water. So integrity is one. The other one is inclusion. If that's going to be part of your culture, do you go out of your way and make sure that you include every person who is in a particular meeting? And even if the person is not present, how do you? So there are several ways, and people always look at the way that you behave. I'll give you an example. We had some very, very difficult times in the year 2008. And every year, our global CEO used to come to India, as he used to go to very other places. But India was his favorite spot. And he was coming in from the US. And every time he came in, I mean, he was a much loved man. And I had I mean, my first meeting with him in some place in the US was a very charismatic man. He wore the best of clothes. He had a Rolex watch and gold Rolex. And I mean, and every inch, a great communicator, a very great visionary. He was coming to India. 2008, we were in the dumps. The world was in the dumps. Economic downturn. I was there to receive him in the airport in Hyderabad. And I had taken one of those very, very fancy, Mercedes Benz to receive him. And as soon as he walked out, he saw the Benz and he says, Nathan, can we do something better? And I froze. And I was wondering if there is any car which is better than this S-Class Merc, and maybe he wanted a BMW. And he looked me in the eye and says, I've heard so much about your India's yellow top. Do we have yellow tops here? So I said, we don't have yellow tops, but I got the message. I immediately told the driver to go away. And then we took, you won't believe it, one of those Meru cabs. Meru cabs are like your Ola Uber, but of course they are not on call. You have to go down. So with his luggage, we dragged that. He gave a very inspiring speech about the state of the economy, how the company was doing, and how together we could do it. And every time he spoke, he used to pump the air with his hands, and he spoke very passionately. Much later that evening, I met with him. I thanked him for all what he did. And I did note that he did not have his Rolex watch. He had one of those, which was more like, which will tell you the time. It will also tell me how many yards you ran or walked and all that. And he was using one of those. And I looked at him and says, what happened to your Rolex watch? And he says, Nathan, these are difficult times. How nice it would be for a CEO of a global firm to come up and pontificate that we should tighten our belts, we should really conserve and all that, and walk around in fancy cars and all these fancy watches. That day I learned a lesson. I'm so very fortunate to have been part of an organization like Deloitte, because you have leaders who really who really talked about culture. No, they lived the culture. The culture of, I mean, people pick up these cues, Chand, and very, very, very fortunate. So it starts with just not the beliefs, but those beliefs in action. People are always watching you, and that's how you build it. And then there are stories, and then you pass on these stories to others. And I've just taken a small bit. I can also tell you one more. I mean, the whole thing about building culture is telling people a purpose. And I know that I've almost run out of time. If you just, Sriram, humor me with just more than a minute.
Yes,
Chan,
yes,
so
go
I
ahead.
remember in one of the factories where I was working, the supervisor was asking the workmen to drill something on the road. And they were using a drill machine. They were bored stiff. They didn't know what to do. And part of my job was also to go on field visits. So I was there watching these people. They had bored expression. And then these people suddenly would be told by no, go to the other side of the road at this particular spot. I think you got to drill some more. And to the extent of about 1.5, 2 feet. And the workers were doing it. The sun was beating on them. And suddenly, out of the blue, the supervisor's boss was again a very, very fine gentleman. He came on, he looked at all the workers, assembled them, and he says, uh, do you know the reason why we are drilling these? Everybody looked at him and gaped and said, we have no idea. So he says, because we want to draw a water pipe to the workmen's colony. You people are not getting enough water. We want to make sure that we get the right pipe, and we don't have maps. Unfortunately, they were lost. This factory is almost about 100 years old, and therefore we want those. And if you drill right and we hit the right spot, maybe from there we can get the right pipes, and maybe we can get that to your. In an instant, the whole mood changed and everybody was working, because this whole thing is about purpose. Culture is also about how do you share the purpose, in a very meaningful way. And that was a great lesson. Very early in my days, I learned about culture is not telling them you do it because I'm asking you to do it. People do it because they see the person, stand by them, and tell them the reason why anything has to be done. So with that, I know we are 2 minutes over time, but Chan, thank you so much. I mean, there are so many stories, Chan, that I could just spend an entire hour speaking to about these stories of the several things that I've encountered. I've been a very lucky man, and thank you so much. You spoke so much of emotions in me.
Thank you, Nathan. I think we'll, in the interest of time, we will, kind of finish over here. Really appreciate you being here. Love the stories. We will, kind of put up the recording and maybe even, kind of take some brief lessons and share it with more people. Appreciate your time. Any closing words from you before we shut?
Thank you so much. I think, Sriram, you're doing an incredible job. Happiness is not really about defining happiness. Happiness is really an outcome. I think you are taking on the right moves of looking at what really builds happiness, whether this is in a workplace or whether this is what's happening in at your home front. So thank you for leading. You are our happiness guru. Keep up the good work. Thank you so much for the wonderful hour that we spent together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We will be putting up the recording. Please join me for future webinars as well, and we'll have interesting people. Thank you for your support. Appreciate it. Thank you again, Nathan. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody who's been on the call and patiently listening to all of what we had to share. Thank you very much. Good day. And wish you all a very happy new year.
Thank you, Sriram. Yes, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to all of you.
Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you. Bye-bye. Cheers.
Thank you.